This episode, I'm joined once again by Jungian psychoanalyst Jakob Lusensky to discuss the work of Carl Jung. I'd like to say a big thank you to all my paid patrons and subscribers for making all this work possible. And if you'd like to support the podcast and keep everything running, please find links in the description below. Otherwise, please enjoy. Jakob Lusensky, thanks once again for joining me on Hermitix podcast.
Nice to be here.
We are going to be discussing broadly and abstractly and, try and find a resolution for myself, I think. Carl Jung, because last time we had our discussion, this idea came about because after we finished the discussion on Jung and the cross and Christianity, I said to you that over the years now, of course, I've had multiple discussions with Paul Bishop, Murray Stein, yourself, and others on Jung. And I've read, the Red Book, a lot of the Black Books, multiple of Jung's works. And I gave you the metaphor that Jung for me is still a sort of infinitely expansive cliff face that I have investigated time and time again, but I don't feel like I've yet to get a foothold and really start climbing, start getting Jung, which seems odd considering discussed him so much. So we were going to have this broad discussion really around the question of sounds a bit crass, but why bother with Jung? And you, I guess where I want to start is a pragmatic question. You as a Jungian therapist, what is it that you want to achieve that you feel can specifically be achieved with Jungian psychoanalysis?
Well, first of all, I'm trying to sort of start very agnostically. So, I don't sort of have a clear, idea that I want this patient to individuate. Although that could be an answer to your question. If you ask Jung, what's the purpose of a Jungian analysis, would be to help a person to become who they are. Or to become more whole, or for a person to become more themselves. But I personally, it's so different depending on the patient and the person, what they need help with. So I try to sort of not come into it with any sort of preconceived ideas about what should we achieve or what should we become. But I do think for some people, and at times, that Jung's concept or idea of individuation is helpful, because it's sort of rooting this quest for meaning and purpose in a person's own biography, also in his or her culture. But it's sort of, the idea that we are all quite different, but we're also all quite similar in certain ways. But there's we all have to find our way. So if there's anything, as a Jungian therapist, I think you try to not come in with any sort of, I want to achieve this, or we should get here. We really try to sort of come away from that. And I think that's also what makes it maybe different as psychoanalyst or Jungian analyst from, let's say, maybe psychologist or, some of the more sort of cognitive behavior-oriented psychotherapists, where it's always okay, someone comes in and we're going to solve this kind of problem. And we could say man is a problem to be solved, but there is something sort of limiting, I think, in the attitude of viewing, one's life or one's patients as problems to solve or, bodies to fix.
Okay, maybe in a minute we'll give a specific example and see what the different approaches are. But I want to focus in on something you said there that I guess is key to Jung and Jungian analysis, which is to become who you are, which sounds like a complete oxymoron, right? Many people would reply, well, I am who I am. Of course I know who I am. How can I become what I already am? So, Jakob, why am I not who I am? What am I? What actually am I? And what's stopping me becoming me?
Well, I think in a Jungian view on that would be kind of like Kierkegaard, that you are in becoming. You are a self in becoming. You're not yet yourself, or I would also say a Christian view, you're not yet yourself, but you know you're on the process of you know becoming yourself, and that goes for you, James, or for me. That it's not like, okay, we're gonna go there, we're gonna meet the shadow, and then we're gonna individuate. It's not like that.
Mm.
It's not like a linear process. But I mean, this all, in order for this sentence to make sense, you know, to become who you are, I think one has to also ground it in the unconscious.
Mm.
And Jung and Freud and psychoanalysis and depth psychology sort of foundation in the belief and in that there are, you know, factors in us that are, you know, and motivating us that we are not conscious of. So only a very ignorant person would actually say that they know who they are. So I think, you know, in my sense, if there's anything I try to be, and I don't know how well I succeed, but if it's something I try to be as a psychotherapist, it's very Socratic in the sense that I don't know very much at all, actually. You know, I know very little about myself or the other, and sort of working from that place.
Mm.
And I think in the Jungian analysis, what's interesting, or in a psychoanalysis, I would say, is that after some time, the unconscious or the dreams that, you know, you work with at times start to sort of take the lead in a way, and we are following in order to understand better what wants to what maybe, you know, what wants to constellate, or what wants to what wants to come alive. And what Jung would say in sort of classical Jungian sense is that it's the self, it's the human self, which is not the ego. It's the human self that wants to, you know, constellate or be realized in a person's life through a process of what he called individuation. So to become who you are. And he took that, and I think I mentioned that last, he took that from Nietzsche. This is not, you know, Jung didn't invent that sentence either.
How do you understand the unconscious? So commonly it's in a way, you know, we can think of, I think the clearest way to approach it in a specific example, I guess, is with the notion of Freudian slips. So you say one thing when, you know, the classic joke, you say one thing when you meant your mother, right? And this word or slip that broke through is a lapse in your conscience, your consciousness, your explicitness, I guess, about the world. And through this, that unconscious is breaking through, and you perhaps have a glimpse at the you that you will become or are becoming. But how do you, that's a fairly explicit example. How do you see the unconscious?
Well, I think it's a good way to start to speak about these sort of explicit, you know, examples that most people can relate to. Actually, I had an experience this morning that is similar or very simple, but I've had a kind of a fallout with a colleague, or not a colleague, a friend, I should say, and I had his number still in my phone, and for some reason in my phone it always shows up on the top. It's like big, his name, and it's always there. It's like months, and then I was thinking about him and the fallout this morning, and I just wanted to, you know, see if I could remove it, and of course I called him, and he picked up. Anyway, so now we're talking again. I mean, you can say that that's just a slip, or that's just like that. That doesn't mean anything. Or you know, and my feelings around him was rather like, I don't want to meet him. I want to erase him. I don't want to have him in my phone even. I don't want to see him. But you know, what happened was actually that, you know, I called him. So we could say, like, it may possibly, you know, our unconscious, you know, our deeper motivations is, you know, in this case, for example, I'm hurt. Actually, probably I would like, you know, to have a connection with him, but it doesn't work. So the unconscious can be, that can be also a very simple example. But I think, you know, Jungian view is different from Freudian view. Yeah, so a Freudian view, the unconscious is made up of everything that you're taking in from the outside world. Yeah, it's all made up of, you know, we are born tabula rasa, we're taking it all in, and some things are repressed and, you know, made unconscious. While Jung said, like, no, they are, you know, we are not born tabula rasa. The unconscious is, you know, something that's, you know, alive in all of us, and we are actually, you know, dreaming about, and, you know, the unconscious is made up of more than, you know, what happens to us in our, you know, biographical everyday life. So this is also, I think, a quite an important, you know, difference that we can go in more deep into when we speak about the collective unconscious and archetypes and such. But to answer your question, I think that on a pragmatic level, the unconscious can be a very helpful factor in overcoming symptoms and suffering, a certain type of neurotic suffering. The unconscious is, let's say, maybe the foundation of the psyche, meaning like, all the pieces or the parts of yourself and your thoughts and your thinking that you might also not want to present to the outer world, but also thoughts, fantasies, and ideas that you might not even want to consciously make conscious for yourself because they're shameful or disgusting or not considered something that is fitting with the image that you have of yourself.
There's a notion of, well, a lot of words come to mind, a lot of synonyms in a way that have loose relations, but sort of gap, leap, opposite, void, like something that there is an impasse. So what I mean by this is that psychoanalysis, I guess, from the beginnings, from Freud, he would emphasize this a lot, that it seems like much of it is an paradoxical study of opposites that of all kinds, that in our own conscious refusal of them, we then develop other habits and repressions and symptoms, as maybe someone like Lacan would say. But, to give the explicit example, once again, this idea, which I think does originally come from Freud, of, when you have a fear or a hatred of someone or something, it's because often is the case, not always. I don't think Freud's a universalist in that way, but often is the case that thing is lurking in you and you are disgusted or despised or shameful of it or hate it because it is perhaps too revealing of yourself. Does Jung continue on that line, or does he have any alterations there?
Yeah, Jung continues on that line, and this insight that we project the worst of ourselves on our enemies. It's not something that an insight that came with Freud or Jung. It's already in the Bible, about seeing that you rather see outside of yourself what you don't want to see within yourself, but they don't use the term of the unconscious. So I think Jung would speak a lot about the shadow, but the shadow is a very broad, I think, concept in a sense, but it would be relating to those aspects, maybe those sinful aspects we would have said in the past that we rather don't see ourselves embodying, but we sort of protect ourselves from that, from seeing that in ourselves by projecting them or putting them on our partners or our parents or whatnot. So it's projection is a mechanism of defense to sort of protect the ego, if you like. So I think an encounter with the unconscious, it's not like just like a pleasant ride. It can be anything unpleasant. And if you ever visited a psychiatric ward, you'd see that. It's Jung and Freud had different views. Jung had Freud, I would say, had a more negative view on the unconscious, or like more, this is sort of this reservoir of aggressive forces and sexuality and such, death drives. While Jung, although Jung had much more, and he was the one who had real psychiatric experience, he still saw that they have the capacity of the unconscious, and that there is something about them. Jung viewed the unconscious, or let's say the mind, as a sort of self-regulatory system. So like we have to sort of create a balance, if you like, or a relationship or a dialogue with our unconscious. Otherwise, we're going to live, a one-sided life, or we're going to have symptoms, we're going to get panic attacks or depressions, because we are not we are not aligned with ourselves, with our feelings. And if there's something in the unconscious that's not maybe so mystical, or so, maybe this sounds all kind of a bit vague, I think the unconscious in my mind is made up of our feeling life. And it has a lot to say about our emotional life. And that's something that many people in today's world, maybe always, have wanted to repress or, push down.
That's interesting. I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say, I was going to ask the question, which is a little bit zero sum, and you use the word self-regulatory, which I think is really good, because it's becoming, it's ongoing, it's a flux, it's a process, it never has an end. But the fact that you yourself align it more with feeling, and I see this now, visualize the unconscious here, perhaps as some sort of spectrum, but not as quantified as that. But we're never done with this, are we? We're never done with the unconscious. We don't, repress so much that we just turn into a zombie that's absolutely dead. There's always going to be something. We have to live. But at the same time, the other end of that is equally just as dangerous. And so as we grow, as we mature, this process is ongoing. But it does seem that there is a current deadening of the unconscious, where we are perhaps more so on one side, where feeling isn't allowed through. It's more so emotion than feeling.
Yeah, I would say, and you would just probably add to that feeling, emotion, and also this symbol formation. Sort of again, this that the psyche or the unconscious expresses itself, as Lacanians also would say, through symbols or through signs. So it's also like this whole art, if you like, of understanding dreams or reading dreams or making sense of dreams, maybe even making sense of Jung. This question of the symbolical and the role of the symbolical. I would absolutely agree that that's often repressed or denied in a sort of more common discourse. But it's a very, I think Jung himself, again, when he had his own encounter with unconscious, where his Auseinandersetzung, as he called it, like his confrontation with the unconscious back in 1913, and when he started to write those black books that then became the red books. I mean, his way of approaching the unconscious, it wasn't like he started a dream diary. He sat down in the evening in his study and felt like shit, felt like really bad, very anxious. He said, like really like close to paranoid, was afraid that he might go schizophrenic or like would lose his mind, because he was so emotionally distraught by, God knows what. There were many reasons. One of them being that he had separated from his father figure Freud, and the fallout had happened. And what he did then was like he said like, okay, I will just encounter and actively engage with whatever my psyche sort of produces. And that's when he started to sort of call his soul, my soul, where are you? And he started to engage in fantasy creation, active imagination, and write down those fantasies. So he took an active approach, like I'm going to confront, these, emotional figures, that comes up when I close my eyes, and take serious what they say. So I'm just saying this to say that I think he found his way, or one way of engaging with the unconscious, and he saw that it helped him also personally to engage with the fantasies and to, again, establish a sort of dialogue. And I think it's a similar way when, a patient comes in, and after the first session, I ask them to, the only thing I ask you to is to try to write down your dreams and try to sort of pay attention to what's happening there. So you're starting a dialogue with this unconscious parts, and with that can a lot of healing, I would even say, happen. And not again healing from the human condition, but certain healing and certain overcoming of certain neuroses.
We'll come back to that word healing, I think, probably at the end, come round to that. There's a couple of questions there. I guess we'll begin with fantasy. Fantasy is more real than, quote unquote, reality?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would like to hear your thoughts on that. But in my mind, I think, for some people, they need less fantasy. Other people need more. I think in general, and then there's also levels of fantasy and imagination. I mean, today we have a market of fantasy. We sold fantasies for technology, so and all of that. But I think for some people, fantasy can give life back and feeling back to their reality. But I don't think it's more important than, especially these days, than reality.
Well, maybe not more important, but it's okay. So the way you said, you like my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
The way I would think about it, it's actually, I mean, the rephrasing of that, to quote the fiction author David Foster Wallace, where he says, fiction, I think he said, roughly to paraphrase, fiction is what it is to be alive. Fiction is more true than fact. And the way I think about this is in how we utilize language in descriptions in fiction novels. So, for instance, if you were to go to your favorite landscape or or maybe just your favorite tree somewhere, and then someone said, write a description, you wouldn't go leaf by leaf, like to the most minute detail. You would describe it as basically a sort of internalized fantasy of how you appreciate that tree. In the same way, for instance, the difference between a Turner painting, a Monet painting, but then you get to someone, actually, it would be better to use, let's use portrait painters. You could have a realist portrait painter or an expressionist portrait painter. But then when we get to the fantasy appreciation of someone like Francis Bacon or Egon Schiele, all of a sudden, we begin to see that maybe something different is happening with the fantasy. So in that sense, that's what I mean, is that there is in our apprehension of the world, that fantasy isn't quite literally the tree itself, but that projection, that fantastical projection of how we understand the tree, how we truly see the tree, in turn allows us to see how we ourselves are working perhaps under the hood. And to tie that to dreams, there is this common, as I understand it at least, common misunderstanding of Freud and dreams. So when people think of Freud analyzed dreams, people, I think, often go to this idea that if a oak desk appears in your dream, then you can now go quit your job, right, or something like this. Whereas Freud emphasized that the patient's free talk, how they just freely understood the dream, is the most important thing. So
Right.
that's what I mean by fantasy being more real, is that in that apprehension of things, there's something important.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. And I think, I do think the Freudians they have a very different way of working with dreams than the Jungians. And also, like, Freud and Jung had many discussions around dreams, and Jung felt that Freud was often sort of kind of reductive still in his thinking, that he wanted to bring back his interpretations to, the death wish, or to, wanting to kill the father, or that Jung criticized Freud for sort of taking dreams a little bit too literally still, or like connecting too much with his own theory of the mind. While, I mean, in the Jungian world, you don't speak about free associations, but you speak about amplifications. So, like, let's say, take the dream example of the dream, then I would, ask you, so what's a tree? What's a tree? And you would go off and, start to speak about trees and your experience of trees, and there might be cultural references or something you read about trees. And then it's, again, I think similar there, like, okay, what is it then that you sort of emotionally connect with that? What is it that, this feels like, now we're talking about something that has to, that touches me, or that has to do with your story. So in a way, I think Jungian and Freudian interpretation looks on the surface quite different, but I think we want to do sort of the same thing, unlock or establish a feeling connection that goes deeper than the intellect. And I don't know, and we don't have to go here now, but I do think, like, your fantasy and your based on that you shared with me about climbing, the wall, or climbing, Jung here. You have a lot of experience with Jung. I mean, you read a lot, but that's the image that you are, presenting. So I was also wondering if we should explore that image a little bit.
Well, I have a better dream that we could explore, but we can explore the. I actually think to be honest, I think the cliff face metaphor, this idea of searching for a foothold, I think it's fairly straightforward. I think it's, I guess in a sort of classically Freudian sense, it's castration anxiety, in the sense that I want to surmount, right? I want it to be whole. I want there to be a point where I go, right, I'm on top of Jung. I'm done. I get it. And I can't stand the fact that actually maybe the point is to consistently admire the cliff face and take from it what you can, and then go off into the world. Like, why do you need to get over this? That is my own reading, which I've noticed this from my podcast conversations, by the way, that a common question I always ask is, what's the teleology, right? Like, I want to tie everything up in a neat bow and have it done. So that's your
interpretation as well. Yeah. And what's your fantasies after then, or on the other side?
Well, I think that's why it's like the castration anxieties, because after that you have to go off. I think it's a big I think this is actually maybe Jung, you would probably know, maybe Jung commented on this at some point, that I will cite the Gospel of Judas as the most helpful thing here, because Gurdjieff uses this, and I think it's a good metaphor to use. So the Gnostic Gospel of Judas in this is this idea in this gospel that Judas knew that he was going to betray Jesus, and that this was actually a task given to him. And so Gurdjieff's understanding of this, and I think a Gnostic understanding of this, is this point where the disciple, the student, has to betray the master, and the actual fear and worry of that moment is that you will have to go off on your own, and quite like Jung and Freud have that severance where you no longer have the father figure to guide you. And so that's what I mean. That's what I mean by that. And it's a severance from, severance from safety and a possible the falsity of a wholeness. Yeah, there you go.
But how do you enjoy the climb? I mean, because it's not like you just witness, or observe, or it seems like you've been climbing a little bit.
It's icy. The cliff face is icy. I should have mentioned that. Like, as I visualize it, it's icy. It's very slippery.
It's icy. It's very slippery. But do you have experience of having climbed up, or is it more like you're watching this and you don't even take the first step?
I take the first step and then I get bored and try down another route, right? It's the common, like the first or second hurdle. You have to really stick with I think with Jung, you have to really stick with an idea. Like, you have to. It's not solely intellectual, so you have to not specifically meditate on it or explicitly meditate on it, but at least allow to really sit with an idea. I don't think it's solely an intellectual journey where you just keep getting more and more knowledge. It's more of a gnosis. And so you climb a little bit, you realize you're not making any more progress, but that's because that progress is no longer, after a certain level, progress is no longer solely intellectual with you.
But is it like you go up and climb a little bit again? Or like, okay, I'm going to try again. Is it like that with Jung, or are you more like, I given up, or are you still sort of curious? Or?
Absolutely. I'm talking to you. So, absolutely. And I think Jung, more than anyone else, has that draw, right? To just keep wondering about things.
But it's not frustrating, or is it also frustrating?
No, I don't know. I don't think so. Because no. Have you ever found Jung frustrating?
No, I hear that from people sometimes, like, or he's so difficult to read, or like he's so confusing, or I feel like that he's like only in circles, or he's going a little bit all over the place. You can't sort of just, it's not like, an autobahn. He's really like that, maybe like that climb, it's really, now you're here, and then you have like, jump up here, and then he usually comes back to his, point. But I don't know how, that sort of fits me, because I'm not sort of very, I'm more like that in my thinking, I think. But so that's why I was just wondering if it's like more frustrating, but it's not for you. It's more. Sometimes you said you get bored.
Did I?
Yeah. You do climb a bit, but then you get bored. You said.
Yeah, I did say get bored. Yeah, I guess. I know I don't get bored of Jung. I don't know what it is I get bored of.
I
don't know.
I think also, like, I mean, many people think about the coming into Jungian analysis, at least with this sort of, not that there's a script, but kind of like, like the Jungian path, and, we have this anima, we have the shadow, we have the persona, we have the self. And I think there might maybe be something to that for some people, but in my experience, very little. So what I'm trying to say with that is, like, I think one can engage with Jung. I don't think one can sort of understand the whole of Jung, because I don't think his work sort of holds together in all together. They tried with the collected works to make it sort of, a whole, but in a way, the way he sort of wrote and the way he published wasn't like, I would say with the ambition to create a theory. I mean, there were tension there, and he had theory and he developed theory, but it wasn't like any sort of scientific attempt to create a whole, yeah,
Is
theology.
is there even a loose structure that you, as a analyst, bring to sessions, or to the full 12 sessions, or however many sessions it might be? Is that ever in the back of your mind to think about, okay, if now I'll do this and ask these questions, and we'll try and move it towards a certain direction? Because this is one of my
No.
key questions, I think, is if that isn't the case, then what is the role of the analyst for a Jungian analyst?
Yeah, I think you try to, as Jung would say, to forget about all theory when you have a person, like not bring any theory in. If another patient would want to engage with it, and it would be helpful. Maybe you also work sometimes with people who are training to become Jungian analysts, and you need a theory. But like if we would work together, we would not. That wouldn't be a great place to start. I think where you start is the unconscious. And that's like either you have a dream, and you bring that dream in, and we start talking about you, and we start talking about what you're struggling with, and we start talking about what constellates in the dream, and that how that can be helpful on your path, on your climb, or whatever we call it. So it's very, I mean, in my understanding of Jung is that it's about that Socratic sort of I don't know position that one has to own and embody, and it is, I don't know if you said 12 sessions, but often the therapy is going on for years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't. I was just kidding.
But at least a year, I say, without less than a year, I mean, you can do that. But but you probably get a different answer if you ask Murray Stein, possibly. I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years, him for 40 years, or is it 50? But I don't find it very valuable to bring in too much theory, but you can use the theory to sort of make sense of maybe where the patient is in his or her journey, if you like.
So why do you need Jung at all?
Well, I think Jung and reading Jung and Jung's thoughts help one to develop one's different sort of functions as a human being. Like it can help you develop your thinking and how you view the human psyche, and sort of the purposeness, if you like, to understand the unconscious better, like by reading. When you study in Zurich, you have exams on fairy tales, you have exams on myth and legends. So it's a lot of reading about historical stories that has also according to Jung, an archetypal sort of component. So I think what Jung is possibly doing for some people is to fine tune both your thinking and also especially maybe your feeling. So as a therapist, you're very much there to listen to or feel into what the patient might be himself or herself not really connected with. So it's not so much. I think that's in a way, I guess you could say, you become as a therapist a close ally with the unconscious. You try to sort of ally yourself with the unconscious of your patient, and listen, in a very how should I say, thoughtful way, but where you also listen to how what's your feeling response to this. You might tell me something that sounds like, you might tell me something very traumatic that you experienced with some family member, but you might tell me that in a very sort of factual way or with a lot of feelings. So I think in the end it's about, okay, but how can we help a person to be in touch with their wounds or with themselves, if you like, and how can you help a person to be in touch with their feeling life and emotional life?
You're always listening between the lines?
Well, I mean, I think that maybe that's what they say, you listen between the lines. Maybe you listen and you feel, what's in the room.
Has this affected your life outside of the therapeutic setting? Do you see this more easily now everywhere with people?
Well, I think, people who go through an analysis gets usually more sensitive. So I think a good analysis makes people more sensitive to the world, and that's not always appreciated, or maybe not what people went into analysis for always. But I think you do get hopefully more yeah, a little bit more sensitive, for the work. But having said that, some people it's also about strengthening and getting resilience. And I think
Mm.
resilience is something that, analysis also can help people
Mm.
in developing.
Resilience.
Resilience, yeah. It's important to be sensitive to the world and sensitive to one another and to see, another person with less projections or
Mm.
like as a human being, like not what you wish them to be or oh, what should I get out of James today? Like, but also, so I think it's important to be quite open to that.
Mm. Is there a negative of being an analyst?
Well, I didn't answer on your resilience. I just want to
Oh,
say, but the
sorry.
other side, that no, it was me. The other side of that, I think, is that resilience. I would mean. It doesn't help a person very much if he's just walking around and, crying about or the whole life and situation and all the suffering that we see. Yeah, I think it's also about, finding a creative response to, the world.
Mm.
Today, I think many young people, and not only young people, but struggling with, why even bother with the world? Or like, it's so fucked up, sorry, but like,
Mm.
why should I even, start? Why should I even start engaging? Why should I even read the news?
Mm.
To sort of give people a sense like a sense of a creative response to the world where you're maybe sensitive but you're still building something or like you still continue. It's like that Nietzschean idea, like where they're building the sand castles on the beach. It's like it's going to be swept away, but like help continue to build, continue to live your life although there's suffering and although there's loss and although there will continue to be so. But I think to be I don't know. I think to be a patient, I think both to be a patient or to be an analyst, it's like, I think it doesn't necessarily make life only easier.
Mm.
But I think it maybe makes life richer.
Do you think those terms though, success, failure, easier, harder, are they productive?
What do you think?
I don't think so because I think they so one thing I wanted to add in, and this is probably something I'll discuss with Bruce Fink as well, because he actually mentions this in the book, one of his recent books, and I'm just intrigued as to where this has come from, the approach. But I personally think, and I think this is how, if therapy is advertised, there obviously isn't a therapy company like there is Coca-Cola that is putting adverts, but when you see adverts for therapy apps or online videos about therapy, there is an underlying, often spoken but usually unspoken sort of bias or vector wherein there is this notion that if you do this, you will become happy and problem X will be solved. There is this notion of completion, and completion becomes synonymous with happiness, and that's why I'm sort of skeptical of the word easier, because it's not difficult to make your life easy. Lay down and become a sloth, and life's easy, right? That's not a good thing, and so I think there's a difficulty for, I guess, psychodynamic therapies in the modern world, because I don't really think that is what they're doing at all. But they have to engage with that modern sensibility, or at least perhaps even deconstruct it, to engage with that modern sensibility first. To say, look, actually, you don't want happiness, or whatever that could mean. You want, as you said, you want something that will allow you to answer that question of why even engage with the world, why engage with my depression, why engage or try find this friction with whatever it might be. That's not going to be happiness. Something more, and it's not going to be easy. But I don't think people want easiness. It's a different relationship with suffering, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think many people come in with that attitude of wanting to feel more at ease. And I do think there's something that psychoanalysis has always helped with in that regard. It's about like, I think giving people the freedom to enjoy pleasure, think there is something important to that. Many people come in with a very dominant superego, and I'm not allowed to do anything, and there's just guilt and shame, and I can't relax. So I mean, we all suffer from stress today. So I think there is something about this sort of just, I'm just going to enjoy my life for a moment, although the world is burning and my life is crazy outside. So that is, like, I would say, really important. But I think on a larger level, after a longer analysis, I think it's more about, changing a worldview in a sense, or getting a better worldview, or a more realistic worldview, or even developing, a worldview that is sort of more true to reality. Like if, people come in, I mean, hedonism, for example, can be very satisfying for, one's 20s. But like after you've done that for maybe 10 years or so, it's like, okay, so what's there? And becoming a cynist, or so like that's where I think Christianity, or like, not that those are packages that you can just jump into, but just to say these are developed worldviews that describes the human, situation. And if you want to seek long-term happiness or some sort of contentment or peace, we have to start wrestling with existential questions. And and it's not like Jung has answers to all the existential questions. I mean, many of the thinkers that you have in your podcast have better answers or different answers. And again, like what comes out of a Jungian analysis is not like, hey, here's the Jungian. Maybe someone, but it's hopefully a human being who is more, in touch with themselves, less narcissistic, and maybe have more of, I would say, even more of a maybe religious sense. I mean, Jung speaks about the religious instinct that life is sort of about shifting from this sort of ego. I want to start to follow, what he calls the self, and living a life that is, also in service for others and whatnot. I do want to say also that I feel like a little bit unresolved in regards to your, not that we have to solve it today, but I want to understand this Jungian, this image that you gave with the cliff.
Okay. So I know. I think the key term is foothold, right?
Foothold.
Like I wanted a foothold. I could never really felt like I could get purchase, right? Like now we're moving, now we're going. But it's once again, it's this whole idea of going somewhere. Why? You just, as you said, with reading Jung, there's a recursivity, a circular nature, a holistic nature, right? You don't go, right, I'll start with volume 1, and then when I get to volume 50 or whatever it might be, probably with Jung it's like volume 500, when I get to the final volume, then I've completed. It's not, you're always, you read one thing and then you read another, and that bolsters the other thing in a richer way, so then you go back, and so there's this holistic thing, and you don't climb a cliff face holistically, right? You wouldn't climb up a bit and then go along, and then so this is probably why I had this conversation, because I think my own projection of Jung, he's not a cliff face. Maybe Lacan maybe is the closest to a cliff face. You say you read through you get the structure, and then you're at the top, and now you can go to it. They probably disagree, but yeah.
But it sounds like you almost. I mean, I follow, and this makes a lot of sense to me. But what about? Would you need like a different image, or what do you think?
I'm not sure what image would be helpful for Jung. If I was to ask you to visualize that same thing of approaching Jung and the Jungian, I mean, what image springs to mind for you?
Well, I mean, I think my image is, more of a forest, and you can get lost there. So it's also dangerous, and it's also not like, there's no promise of a way out or a way through. But there is, for me, I think more of a, and I don't think that's too different in a way. It's still, you have to confront your fears. And this, what you say about slippery, it's icy. That's like something that's ice, something that's cold, something that hasn't melted. Or I don't know if it should melt, but it's something cold there that I think is also like.
I don't think, in my mind, it's never going to melt.
It's never going to melt.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, but your feelings for Jung, they're kind of warm. Or no?
You mean the man, or Jung?
Yeah, thinking of Jung, Jung and his idea. Yeah, maybe Jung in your life right now.
It's warmer lately. Yeah, it took me a long time to warm to him.
warm up. Yeah.
I think that's a good thing, though. You couldn't. Yeah. Do you think analysis something falters or is irretrievably lost if the communication becomes too social?
In analysis,
Yeah.
I think that's often sometimes how it starts, but I mean, things gets more personal and private, and things start to melt a little bit, and you start to feel each other, and you start to feel the person, and the person starts to share what they're actually feeling. And so I think, but there are like interesting maybe to this image that you shared. Like there's been people I met with that it felt more like a cliff or like a wall, and it's like very difficult to connect with them. You can sit there, you talk, and you listen, but you feel like there's no water or there's no. So and it can be also with people, sometimes men, stereotypically, but probably true. Like we're so too much in their thinking. This is also something that Jung, is kind of direct on. Like he's valuing the mind, he's valuing the intellect, but he sees the limits, or I think what you said about this, like achieving, or like the limits of the ego, if you like. And I think this has a lot to do with Jung's own sort of process of melting, or process of shrinking, or process of, I think, also becoming more humble, as a person after his whole confrontation with the unconscious, and the separation from Freud. I'm not saying that he became some sort of sage, or like just a nice guy at all. I think he was very complex his whole life, actually. But I think he started to appreciate his feeling much more. And that's also, if you look at the Red Book, I don't know what you think, but it's quite remarkable, the hours that this man spent drawing a little flower, or like drawing a mandala. This is not like, it's just, there's a lot of love and dedication, I think, in him. And also, if you read his letters, he's so, it's not like an intellectual exercise. He's very intellectual, but he's also very relatable. And I think that's maybe on this, what you said, your question about social in the analysis in the therapy room. Yeah, I think it might start there, but Jung would probably say that in the beginning, people are sort of identified with their persona, so they even bring it into therapy, and then after some time, you can sort of loosen that a bit and start to have a real relationship.
What is the shadow?
Why did that? I mean, I will try to respond.
It was on my notes. There's just something because I know, because I think, I guess to add this into the conversation, it's something I wanted to make sure I got in, because as this is a broad Jung discussion, I think one of the things that is bringing a lot of people to Jung today is a multitude of books that I've seen called something along the lines of, Integrate Your Shadow, or whatever this might be. And I think this is something that intrigues people about Jung, possibly against that notion of modern therapy that I mentioned, of this, brooch of whatever this shadow might be, this side of us.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's another thing with the sort of maybe the snippiness of Jung, that it's very hard to find his own definition. So like, it's not like he's like, here's this, here's that, here's that. There's some books where he gives it a little bit more of a treatment, but I would say in general, you have to sort of pick it from different places. So I don't know but if you ask what is the shadow, I would say, it changes, throughout the process. But in the beginning, it's usually sort of the most part of one's unconscious, because many people also come into therapy. They might not even, believe that they have an unconscious, or like believe that there is something there. So a shadow would be everything to begin with, everything that you don't see in yourself. Like, so that would maybe include like, so I see this in you instead, or I project it outside, or I put it somewhere else. But I mean, more, since it's called a shadow, it's also like Jung says, it's also like the parts that you really, really dislike most in yourself or in others. Or like, this is also a bit pop psychology, but when like, the parts in others that mostly annoy you probably has something to say about your own, your own shadow, what you don't want to see in yourself, so you see it in others. Whether it's, arrogance, or like everyone is arrogant, he's arrogant, and, probably at times that person struggles with arrogance. But then when you start to study the dreams, the shadow is often personified as a male character in men, and kind of like a character that's there and maybe gives advice and is like a character that's male. Often it takes like the image of maybe of a friend or some old colleague or something. So in a dream, for example, if you would work with a dream, I think you can kind of often sort of almost see like, oh, this person, why is he showing up again? It's not like the person met him recently, and then you ask a little bit about his characteristics, he's arrogant, he's this and that, and then you start saying, okay, maybe this is something that also belongs to you, and it's when I say Jung's encounter with the shadow, if you want to look into that, his own shadow, I think that's in Scrutinies that he added to the Red Book, and when he's like really scrutinizing himself and like looking at his like pride, his vanity, like he's really having a very rough, a very harsh discussion with himself. So I think, and usually in the shadow, and Jung says it's like in the shadow, you also usually find a lot of aggression or anger. Many of us don't want to present, those sides. We want to, hold those back. We want to be nice, polite, people and having, in the society. But so the shadow would be, often, repressed. And like it's sort of, and the idea would be not to become like a arrogant, person or like just say everything you think, but to be able to, for example, use your anger or to be able to set boundaries or to be able to speak up for yourself when necessary. I think the shadow holds a lot of the emotional life of a person, and that's what makes it, truly valuable. But if the shadow is unconscious, you're just gonna either act it out for different moods or in your relationships, or you're gonna project it on others, and in that way keep it at a safe distance.
We've covered a lot of the key terms, but anima and animus, I mean, I'm hesitant to sort of just quickly bring these terms in because, as you said, you don't approach analysis, with these in mind, trying to connect them in. It's more of a background grammar that you might use to understand things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also hesitant. I'm not sure. Like, I'm kind of. I know. I mean, I respect. We have to see where you want to go, but I'm wondering if it's more interesting with you. If you are more interesting, like not that to reveal something super private, but I'm still wondering, like as this ABC of Jung, we can sort of. I mean, it's interesting, but I still wonder about you and your wrestle. Maybe I'm overdoing it. Maybe there's not more there, but I'm wondering if there's something more there.
Why do you think there's more there?
Well, because we set up this idea of sort of exploring together, your own hesitations or no, maybe not hesitations. No, not
I'm not sure
hesitations.
that's how I phrased it. But yeah.
No, 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 no. Your own, let's just say your relationship to Jung, and that it's like it's kind of complicated, a little bit complicated, or at least it's not straightforward.
I think the most interesting questions in life, and this is probably very psychoanalytical actually, what we were talking about earlier with the gap and the paradoxes, are the cases within which one asks themselves, why do I keep coming back to this thing? I think those are the most interesting areas of life, and repeated dreams as well, I guess, would be of importance. But this notion of, hang on, well, why do I keep coming back if I don't know anything? Right. So with this idea of becoming who you are, there is an unknown. You know the unknown, and you're trying to somehow know the unknown, right? Which is a paradox. And yet you continue to do it. So it's always the question for me: is every few months or so, why do I keep coming back to Jung if it seems there hasn't been any major shift or revelation from reading and engaging with his work? Maybe there has, and I just haven't noticed it. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. But also like, I mean, I still wonder because if there's nothing to climb, I still wonder if there's nothing to climb, if that's not the fully fitting image for where you are today. It's like now it sounds more like you're describing it as kind of an engaging, stimulating, and rewarding relationship that you have to something. It doesn't sound like a blockage, or
Mm.
doesn't sound to me like you're in the attitude of conquering. But
No, but I think I used to. I think more recently it's become why not just enjoy. You ignore, right, because in conquering, in surmounting, in trying, and those two words are they're a bit too dominant. I think more so just this idea of telos, right? There will be a point in that you ignore the mountain, right? You ignore the mountain. The mountain's bloody beautiful. It's deep. There's all these little nooks and crannies that you can investigate. But when you have a telos, you just, right? How do I get up it? Right? How do I get this done? And then I can go die happily, you know?
So can I ask you then? So I would love to ask you this question, what you started with. So, why bother with Jung?
Dear me. I ask myself this a lot, because there isn't really any telos or teleology, there isn't any points, I don't think, there. And if there are, they're almost tricks, that you go, oh, now I've got to go here, now I've got to... And then eventually you realize, like, this whole thing is recursive, as you mentioned. Why bother? I mean, this is why I think the notion, this modern notion of therapy or analysis or healing as something that will have, it's a very, very Western notion, probably from Enlightenment thinking, maybe even lodged in our collective unconscious, very new archetype for us of, the directional man or woman. That's really dangerous because there's only one direction in life, right? There's only one endpoint, which is death. It's the only thing you're rushing towards when you're rushing through all this stuff. So why bother with Jung? I think maybe it's an explicit intellectual engagement, which is, in the intellectual part, it's suffering because you don't get intellectual catharsis from. I understand that now. Like, you don't get that.
Like
That's
from the emotional side, engaging with Jung.
It's a good grammar there. I mean, I find Reich. I'm a Reich man, so I find Reich. I don't know so much about Jung's relationship with the body, and I think the body is super, super key. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you read him, you don't feel his body so much, or he doesn't feel.
No, just the engagement on like, I think, mind body split is sort of a fallacy, but it is how we are, and so a solely intellectual engagement. Even language, right? If we were to turn off the video, you wouldn't see what I'm doing with my hands or my face or the emphasis. And I wouldn't see that your eyes are drooping. You look like you're going to fall asleep, right? So it would change the whole thing. And so I think, I don't know if you never had engagement with the body in that way.
Well, I don't think it would change super much, honestly. I feel like, because I really feel like whether we had the camera on or off, I think we would feel each other on some level. I mean, like maybe feel is too strong of a word, but sense, each other's presence in this dialogue we're having together. And to me, it's like, I hear what you say. I mean, and Reich is much more explicit around the body. And I also think, I'm not sure reading Jung is like a bodily experience, but I think engaging in Jungian work is a body work, I would say.
Okay.
But it's not a body work where you stand up and like, well, necessary, although that might happen. But when you listen to each other, when you spend time together in an intimate way, the body gets start to engage us, and the feelings are, they are in the body. That's where they hide. So like. It's also very common, I would say, for a Jungian analyst to ask about like where do you feel that, or how does that feel, and also just like to say Jung himself. I mean, he was on many planets, no? He was like very high up in thinking and all of that. But again, his focus on working with his hands, or he's working with stone, or very physical person. That's also what people describe him, like coming into a room like like a physical presence. I'm not saying this to argue like, oh, Jung. No, I think I'm saying this because I think some people think wrongly about Jung again, or you won't get Jung, or you won't get much out of it if you engage with it purely intellectually. And if you engage with it emotionally, or if you accept the sort of, what you said before, like the sort of engagement or the mountain, the mountain is the way, like you're climbing is the way, then I think you get a much more rewarding experience. But then I also want to say that I think Jung is a trickster. I mean, he's a complete trickster. So like it's also like, as my friend Sean McGrath said that I'm going to meet later today, a philosopher and a theologian, he like yes that Jung is a master for like when it comes to psychological integration, but when it comes to Christianity, it's easy to get lost. He's not a good guide on Christianity.
Well, there's something interesting there. I mean, I think it's to draw on all the language we've used so far. Jung emphatically isn't linear, but the thing is, life and suffering aren't linear either. And I think of a quote by Anthony Wilden, which is, reality is what trips you up when you're not paying attention. And this notion of a trickster, it might seem to some, and this applies to a lot of these kind of thinkers, I think, that some people, often these people who get called charlatans, and I'm sure that word has been applied to Jung many times, is because of this tricky nature. But without the tricky nature, you get 80% of the way there, but it's on rails, it's guided. And that the trick is the thing, at the end of a long talk says, oh, by the way, I don't agree with any of that, and makes you have to finally actually engage yourself, right? And then that's the important thing, is you have to do your own gnosis. And so I think tricks are important for that reason, that life throws you tricks. And you couldn't have a linear journey because that's not how anything else works.
Yeah.
Or it can be how other things work. I think this is the more dangerous side, is that if that is how you are given to view things in that linear manner, what might happen instead is it's not that life will trip you up, it's that you will unconsciously cut out the byways and side paths and detours, and well, you end up dead. Like you can live life linearly, but it means not falling into either feeling or setting boundaries abstractly.
Absolutely. I mean, I must say, James, you sound like a real Jungian right now. What I mean by that is no, what
That'll be £100.
No, but the way that you speak about the process, it's very, like, and again, that image that you shared and the slipping, all of that versus what you're describing now, it sounds like helpful for anyone who would approach Jung too one-sided or too intellectually or too productively, maybe even, that there is something that's risks, one risks missing. Yeah.
So how should one? See, there you go. There's a problem with that word, should. How should one approach Jung as to not fall into traps of their own creation regarding how to approach him?
Well, I don't think everyone needs analysis, but I think an analyst or a therapist or some sort of person that you can have a dialogue with around Jung, I think is really helpful to get out of that mindset of, achieving. And I mean, many people who come into analysis, they also they want to achieve stuff, or they want to get places, and all of that is completely fine and understandable. But I think as the journey develops, it's kind of that softens a little bit, and you become a little bit more of a follower of a process. And I think the way to study Jung it's more important to study one's dreams or one's unconscious and pay attention. If I look at Jung, I could scrap all his theory and just see how he approaches the psyche with the love and care that he spends when it comes to writing dreams or working with images. So in that way, he's like an artist. And I think there's something artistic that's important in one's engaging with Jungian work. But again, it's not. So that's where I think we can learn a lot from Jung. in that type of that type of openness. And I think I believe Jung was a very, very open mind. I must say, what an open mind. So like with an open mind, but like study one's unconscious. That's more important than studying Jung to begin with. But then Jung tends also, for me, I have a similar, in some certain way, the similar relationship to Jung, because I lose touch with him, and then he comes back in the most strange ways. So yeah, I can relate also to your experience, although it's quite different.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, not more than I got really curious about your dream, but that's for another time.
Which dream?
You didn't share it, but you said you had the dream.
I mean, it would probably take a good 15
Yeah,
minutes.
that's for another time.
Okay. All right. I think that's a good place to finish up then.
Yeah.
Jakob Lusensky, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.